And Dagan, we're glad you're back from
Back from the depths.
COVID.
I too had COVID, John.
Sorry?
It was a rough one, but I'm over it.
Joanna is away. I can't remember
Had a
exactly
cold.
where.
Yeah.
So, this is the May 30th meeting of the Housing Blue Ribbon Committee. I'll call the roll. Dagan?
Here.
Mary?
Here.
Eric?
Guilty.
Not with us. Megan is out. Jen?
Here.
John?
Here.
Tracy, we expect. And
Here.
Councilor
Here.
Moreau. Has everybody...
Seat further away from you, Beth.
Byron's not here. Who's going to do notes?
Oh,
Well, doesn't he usually take them from the recording?
yes, but we need to put the captioning on the recording.
Do you know?
You can do that. Can you do that after, or do you have to do that before?
No.
You have to do it before?
Yes, do you want me to? If you go to record,
It's doing it. It's
or if
on.
you go,
Okay,
Kevin must have done it.
we got it.
Kevin just did it?
Thank you.
Captioning okay?
thank you, Kevin.
Captioning's on, I guess. Okay.
And I'll send him the transcript after the meetings.
You are
Thank you,
a
Kevin.
rock
You
star,
rock.
Kevin.
Thank you.
Thanks for that heads up, Jen. Has everybody had a chance to read the minutes of our last meeting?
Yeah, the only thing is, I was on the meeting remotely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll amend the minutes to say that. Any other changes? If not, welcome a motion.
Got it?
Second?
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
They asked us to raise our hands so that we know afterwards, so.
Yes.
And I'm following a good example.
Tracy, you made it.
I was only here 2 seconds before you, so.
I thought I'd take a few minutes, and Joanna and I talked about this, just to recap where we are. We've had 6 meetings, and we have done a lot when you step back and take a look at it. First off, we had a really, I think, thorough discussion of the disposition of Sherburne. We had a lot of public input. We concluded with a vote in April to recommend disposition for below-market housing, and the council acted on that, and that process is underway. The RFQ responses will be in-house June 7th, and then there's, the city manager has a working group that will recommend to the council 2 or 3 finalists. After that, the RKG presentation gave us some valuable insights into inclusionary zoning and the potential locations for that around the city, and what incentives we could use to induce developers to include affordable units. We talked about a variety of incentives, such as height and lot coverage, parking relief, the speed of approvals, maybe downzoning some areas so that extra story is more of an enticement. And all that work, there's a lot of work to do ahead on that, but all that work is pivotal because it sets the stage for the master plan coming up next year. We met with Rick Chelman about a process for zoning changes. He's going to come back to us with a more thoughtful analysis of the RKG data, but I thought an important part of that discussion was how our committee would be part of a structured process to make changes. And what we outlined was we as the Housing Committee would study and recommend a new policy or a new policy direction. Let's say, for example, removing parking minimums. And we'd send that recommendation with all the pros and cons up to the council as a recommendation, and they would vote it and send it back to the planning board, and the planning board and staff would flesh things out and develop ordinance language. There'd be more public hearings, or there would be public hearings. and then they'd send a final zoning change back to the council for approval. So, as I was talking with Howard, I like to think of us as the spark plug of the engine. This workflow starts with us when we initiate a recommended change. There's public input at multiple points along the way, and then it ends up going back to the council with new some ordinance language, and hopefully one or two votes, if we can get it to the council so that it's a quick vote and the work has been done beforehand. And I think that's the way to go. But to put all this into motion, we need the work plan that maps out our effort. And so tonight is the first of two sessions on a work plan, and we have really nice, thoughtful input from 7 of you. And if you've all had a chance to read it, and you've all had a chance to work through Excel, which is a little tricky to use, there are 3 themes that seem to be emerging in what we've seen. 3 of you talked about more city property conversions, putting that surplus city land to work. Griffin Place, I think, has been a success. I hope some of you take advantage of their offer to tour it. And Eric, I know you have thoughts on making that a more careful process, starting with more of a clean slate. So city property conversions comes up with at least 3 of you, 4 of you, I think. And then there's zoning barriers, and how do we remove zoning barriers? Jen talked about rezoning commercial areas for residential use. We're looking at increasing density and addressing parking. And there's another area to explore we haven't talked much about, but I think the Vermont report puts its finger on it, with the so-called gentle density within neighborhoods, to go from singles to doubles without too much change to the neighborhood character. And third, financial solutions. And in that program of work, financial mechanisms such as the housing trust funds, which, as we learned the other night, was created but never implemented. It doesn't exist. And how do we get that to exist and help people? Support for first-time home buyers. I've been intrigued by a low-interest loan fund over in the Connecticut River Valley that's been very successful. So those 3 areas, city property conversion, zoning barriers, and removing them, and financial solutions, are all the work ahead. So our goal tonight, I think, is to review the work plan elements that you guys have created for us, and think about which ones can really have impact towards our goal. And clearly, once we have the work plan, we would benefit greatly by having working groups to go deeper into some of these areas. These 3 areas seem logical for working groups. And Beth and Jen and the assistant mayor have put their hand up for work on zoning barrier removal. We haven't forgotten.
I'm sure you haven't.
Still ready, willing, and able.
I know.
Anyone who puts up their hand never gets forgotten.
That's right. Right. So, that's where I think we are tonight. And when you think about it, in 6 meetings, that's a fair amount that we've done. And we do have the Sherburne in process. So I thought what we'd do is just take a little minute of time to talk about your contributions to the work plan, And if I could be so bold, maybe get each of you to just add a little color commentary. We've got the play-by-play.
So if I can step in there for a minute, John. We had somebody that handed in the assignment a little late,
Yes.
but there's good purpose to it, so I wanted to.
I have a copy of it.
No, everyone
You take
should
care.
have a printout of the current assembly of everyone's ideas.
The late ones have been added to this?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you.
So, John, you're up first with Develop Greater Knowledge of Hometown First-Time Homebuyer Program. And if you could briefly just say what you think we can accomplish out of that.
Well, let me, again, John, thank you. Briefly is not part of my vocabulary, but anyways, I just want to start off a little bit. For those who aren't familiar with
Speak into the microphone, because
Oh,
we're
I'm
being
sorry.
recorded.
For those who are not familiar, the First-Time Home Buyers Program was actually developed back at the time that Mariners Village was being sold, which is now Spinnaker, and that whole area up there. And that was, for those who may have been around here at that point in time, a very, very low-income properties up there. Mariners Village, Wentworth Acres, whatever you want to call it, was a government program, and the rumor was that they would. It was intended for Portsmouth, Virginia, and it was built up here, so there was no insulation, no nothing there.
I think that's correct.
I'm pretty sure it is too. But as I say, I have nothing to verify it, but anyways, so, I mean, kids from UNH would live there. It was very, very reasonable. And at the time it was being sold, first of all, there were developers from New Jersey, I think initially, that were buying it. And all of this low-income housing was going to go away. So the council at the time tried to do something to make available to people who would be impacted by this with a program to purchase housing. So that's really where that initially came from. And right now, the program is set up so that it is available to people who live in Portsmouth and who work for the city of Portsmouth. I think about the only way it gets publicized, as someone who has substitute taught in the Portsmouth School District, when every so often when you get your paycheck on the stub, there's a notice about this program, because that's how it's made of, it's the city employees are made aware of it. So anyways, it's been a good program, but the problem is that 30 years ago when it started, houses were worth a certain amount at that point in time, and now they're worth 6 and 7 times it. So what I want to do is have an opportunity to look at the program and see how the finances work. I don't know if anyone's been able to qualify for it recently. I'm sure they have.
It's got $2 million.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
How
It's,
many? How much?
and
$2 million.
yeah, there's real money there, and it's a great program. But I'm afraid that, as you know, when you see that there isn't a house in Portsmouth for under $400,000. I mean, how many people can avail themselves of this type of program? So what I'd like to have an opportunity to do is look at it and see what can be done. I mean, maybe the guidelines need to be changed. Maybe the city needs to think about putting some more money into it. I don't know. But that's the purpose. That's the reason I brought it up.
Great. Questions for John about that?
No, I'll just no questions, but just to add some thoughts about it. My experience with past first-time homebuyer programs, similar to this, is that there could be certain tie-ins that happen. So I do not know how the current structure is in terms of people having used it. But what I mean by tie-in is that there could be that if we give you a certain amount of money, we become part of the file when this is recorded. So in the future, when you go to sell your house, we get the money back and we can
The
apply
city's a
it.
part owner of the house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain limitation that goes with it. There could be some tie-ins that go on in terms of it being funded by some elements, depending upon what the structure with the trust could be. But I believe that you're right. There could be a chance to address and make it more contemporary to the more contemporary needs.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting, in a different venue, there's a story told about a developer who had a piece of property for sale, and somebody said, this is what I'm willing to pay for it, and this is what he wanted. And so he said to them, I'll sell it to you for what you want, but when you sell that house, 25% of what you make on that house goes to my favorite charity. So that type of thing, picking up on what Howard said, it might be a situation where if someone sells the property and makes $100,000, a percentage of that goes back to the fund to help finance others. So, those are the types of things that can be looked at. That's correct.
Great. Herrick.
I don't know if it's relevant, but I had an experience with this in my career with fishing. I helped create a revolving loan fund for the fishing industry, and there was seed money from the federal government, but there was also a state match required. It's hard to get a state match. So we went out and made an affiliation with a bank. And they processed the program. We had the seed money. Seed money was at a rate of prime +1. And the bank made up the rest. The program's been around for 20 years, 15 years. Highly successful, no defaults. One default, and it's the creativity to make maybe an association with a private institute who they do all the bank does all the paperwork. They monitor the program, they report back to wherever it is. There's probably other thoughts to that, but it would be kind of a revolving loan fund that would go on for a long time. But, it's the creativity that you might think of if you get the seed money and there is some seed money if there's $2 million here to maybe advance the program a little bit, deeper. I don't know how far $2 million will get you and how many applicants would before you exhaust those funds. But if you can turn it into some type of revolving program, I think that has some possibility.
Well, I think we'll get the community development director here and find out. Tracy?
I have an additional thought, as well as these ideas, which are great. 50% of the residents of Portsmouth rent. They don't own, so this doesn't help half of us. Is there perhaps an opportunity for a first-time renter or just a renter assistance program? And I'd like to suggest a model that has been sort of bantered about in the private sector a bit, which is to create a fund that would provide or accommodate for the first month and security deposit, which is a barrier for many renters to move or to come here at all. And one of the ways to do that is to form perhaps a fund or a co-op with interested private parties that would waive the security deposit in first and or last month's rent in exchange for the rent being automatically deducted from the employer's paychecks. So that offers the landlord security that they're not going to flee or fly away, but at the same time allows someone to move. And a lot of people have lately have had to leave Portsmouth or at least move because the rents have been going up so severely. For example, when a property changes ownership, the new owner comes in, spruces it up a bit, doubles the rent. Well, then they have to move, but they can't move because they don't have a security deposit so then they leave Portsmouth. So this is, and that's half of Portsmouth. So I think we need to also think about those folks. And maybe there's a way to do that.
Sure.
Yeah, and if you have an example of that, could you send the link to Howard?
Yeah.
That would be, or Howard and us,
Sure.
co-chairs. That would be great.
Thank you.
And we'll put it on the list, or flesh out this whole thing.
To follow up with what Tracy said, my experience with an affordable housing trust in Massachusetts, in Georgetown, they had an effort where it was taking an approach with what you just mentioned, where the funding came through a different taxation, though. It could be however we establish the funding. This affordable housing trust would help people with down payments, also with the renters. And it became an idea, too, that is not only helping people move into Georgetown, but stay in Georgetown. So if someone fell on hard times, there is a certain ability for them to borrow from the trust to meet 1 or 2 months and then to be able to pay it back. So there's been some early discussion about the housing in not only helping people get housing, but maintain housing. So it could be extended a little bit too. It's just some thought.
Great. Mine is next, low-interest revolving loan fund. I think all the details are here, but this has been successful over in Lebanon, Hanover. It's up and running. It's funded about 250 units of affordable housing. And, you know, government's not going to solve all of this by any means. So this would be a private sector initiative, and some of us on the committee, I would certainly be willing to go be the missionary for this in the banking community. But the idea is that some of our financial institutions take a portion of their capital and say, we'll take a lower return on this so that we can help the economy of this community keep going. And there'd be other businesses, and it's in their self-interest to create a way that there can be more housing for employees. So, questions about that? I'm interested in exploring that.
Is the current interest rate at the Upper Valley Loan Fund 1.5%?
It was in the fall when I looked at it, but, you know, yeah, that's, they're foregoing a lot of profit on that, but.
And is it used to supplement a traditional loan or LIHTC credits, or, I mean, it's.
I don't know.
Yeah.
No.
Does New Hampshire Housing have something to do with it? Did they help establish it or fund it, or no? How do they fund it?
No, I think it was all privately
Privately done.
Evernorth, though, which is a nonprofit, it's like a housing authority for a region, administers it.
I think a great use for this would be with our affordable dwelling units, the ADUs. There's a number of people that are coming in wanting to do conversions, and we could help provide a certain amount of money to them at a lower interest, with the expectation that if there's a certain restriction placed on their ability to rent for the at 100% or 80%. There's variation to who they rent to and what the AMI is and how much they might be able to borrow to provide. So.
Right. You know,
All good thoughts.
yeah. Eric, you've got a couple for us. You wanted to dive into city property conversions.
Yeah, I guess, I wasn't completely aware of what there was for an inventory there, but now understanding it, it's just, how do we proceed with the rest of, with that available property? And, starting with a blank page type thing, how we look at it, how we identify the properties, even, I don't know if it's within the authority of this committee to score the properties in some way, shape, and manner so that we can maybe give them prioritize them for the amenities that would be beneficial to those that are seeking out those properties for a living. But I think it's just like it's just an editorial comment. I mean, I thought that was where we would take all properties, and Sherburne has kind of emerged as a separate discussion with priority. But since that has passed to some extent, whatever's to go forward, we look at them in some blank page. Let's start with a clean slate and look at them in that way. I feel also that the private sector has a big role in this. This is something that government can't take care of, solely. And however we investigate how we can bring the private sector into this, it's just my feeling with the amount of development that's gone on in Portsmouth, there hasn't been a great contribution to this type of effort from those developers. It kind of, in my estimation, or opinion, I'm not sure what these developers have, for the interest of the city. They have an opportunity to develop. That's fine. That we're completely aware that that's taking place, but the interest in the community and the issues that we have in this committee are not being addressed by them. And hopefully we can engage them for whatever else is in development. That's all.
Questions for Eric?
I have a thought. It's kind of interesting, Joanna's brought up about, she keeps talking about, Atlantic Heights. Well, I did a little bit of research, and, that was built by Atlantic Shipbuilding Company. They had a shipyard over there, and they needed a place for their employees, and they built it. And we talked about, Wentworth Acres. That was built by the government when the Navy Yard was kicking out, 50, 60, 100 subs a year, and they needed a place, all the employees to come in. So picking up on what Eric said with regards to involvement of the private sector, would it be possible, for instance, say you have, we don't have that large employer who would be willing to build 100 units or 50 units or something like that. But could we have a situation where you have, you create a mechanism for multiple employers that might have 10 employees that they want to have housing for, and another employer that has 15, and is there a way to create a mechanism where these employers could bond together and develop a facility which will take care of their employees? At one of the earlier meetings, I mentioned of the fact that, and I don't know if I used the name at the time, but I'll use it now, that, Russ Levinson bought a bunch of condos off of Lafayette Road when they first came available, so that his employees that worked for him would have a place to live. And he bought, 8 or 10, or I don't know how many condos when they went up for auction, and he made them available for his employees. Is there an opportunity for employers to, for us to create a vehicle where multiple employers could come together and provide housing for their employees? Just a thought.
Yeah, I'll say I know firsthand that there are a number of employers who are still doing that. And I think that's a phenomenal idea, one we need to pursue. I also think if you've been reading the paper for the past year, we've seen examples of developers who want to do this and are butting up against roadblocks.
Right.
So one of the best values we can provide as a committee is to figure out how to get rid of those roadblocks so that when we have willing developers, it's not an exercise in patience for them. They can go through the process and see results.
And I think that, if I can, I think, Beth mentioned at one of the earlier meetings, one of the vehicles that would work for that is plan unit development, PUD, which they call, and those, and again, I'm not the zoning person, but maybe Peter could talk a little bit about how a PUD would fit into that type of thing.
I mean, there is a plan unit development component now. It's a conservation plan unit development. So you combine, you set aside your conservation land and you get greater density in the core. So you can design it how you want. We'd have to look at what's allowed, but I think probably something we come up with like that, like a denser.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really just changing the zoning to fit it. It sounds more like you're talking about multiple people living in the same building, though, the initial thing you talked about. So that's a little bit different, maybe. I think it could be. Keene just passed a kind of a tiny home development, so you can build a neighborhood of tiny homes in a residential neighborhood. All their residential neighborhoods actually allow it by right. Just has certain rules and structure to it. But, yeah, I think looking at zoning is certainly, there's a lot of options there.
Thank you.
Although,
Yes, sir.
to get specific, in the details haven't flushed out, but isn't Surface Federal Credit thinking of that with some property that they have for housing for their employees strictly?
Beth?
It is not strictly for their employees,
Oh,
but
it wasn't, okay.
there is a charrette process. In fact, I was just looking through my email to try to find the lovely, shiny marketing material that was sent to me recently. I think Howard has it as well. I think we were both, maybe it's in my other email. See, I get too many emails. Can't remember what email I sent it to. They're doing a charrette process, which means they bring in a bunch of volunteer professionals that will spend some time listening to community members to try to come up with what the community thinks would work right there. They're committed to doing a fully affordable project on the land that they have. And they are committed for that to own the land and maybe to lease it to whoever's willing to do it, but it won't be just for them. They'd like to do it perpetually affordable, long-term for the community.
And that charrette is open to everybody.
Anyone who wants to
Anybody who
attend.
wants to come in and speak and observe and be part of it.
Is that info publicly available, or is it just me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I can Google it.
There's a link to sign up at Workforce Housing, Seacoast Workforce, Seacoast WHC, I think it is, .org. And if you go under charrettes and go to Service Credit Union, you click on that, there is a link that would allow you to RSVP a spot for that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I think these are cool programs, and I think in the best case scenario they work. I always worry about could people be paying their employees a living wage or a different wage to also subsidize? So just making sure we're thinking about that as we kind of push those forward. I'm not saying that's everybody's intention, but it's also just my first reaction often.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that?
Have you ever listened to either Maggie or John Randolph speak? They are actually own Harmony Homes in Durham.
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to speak many, many times. Mm-hmm. And they actually put a building next to, an apartment building next to their place in which to house their own staff. And now they're working on a development that's even more than that. And they, there is only, so much you can compete with people, but as far as, in their case, it's just, they're competing with lots of other people who want nursing, right? And nursing as a whole is a shortage. So in their case, paying them more doesn't always keep them. But if you actually only charge them 30% of what they're making and give them a place to live and a way to get there, because they found out when they actually talked to most of their staff, they were driving 45 minutes to an hour. And childcare became an issue, so they put childcare in the place next door as well. So, they actually talk to their employees. So sometimes it's not always about more money. Sometimes it's actually about not being able to live nearby and find proper childcare.
Any other thoughts on John's notion of some vehicle for employers to house their workers? Absolutely. If there's a way to do it, as you say, Dagan, that's the. If we could be a city that finds a key to unlock that, that would be terrific. Megan's not here tonight, but she had also talked about city-owned property and putting that into use, and also about the Housing Trust Fund. And I thought she did a nice job of putting some objectives and actions behind that. Jen, that brings us to you, and you had some good ones.
Yeah, my thoughts were perhaps not as well thought out as everybody else. I was very impressed by everybody's, but I basically just the idea of getting more shots on goal, sort of what Dagan was implying. I think that's my whole theory behind this. Is we've got a lot of land in Portsmouth, and I've said it before. I don't think there's going to be another office building built anytime soon. And I think there are a lot of people who own that land that would be willing to develop housing.
Yeah, and that seems like a really direct path.
Yeah.
We've got an overhang of office research, commercial space, and we need housing.
It was actually asked of the planning board to look at Commerce Way and rezoning Commerce Way, and I've told
That's
the
one
chair,
of the places I think, that comes to my mind.
Well, maybe that's
Borthwick's another one, I think.
maybe that's an early action item that we put into the plan.
Yeah, I just had a question on something like that. If we were to rezone, office research, which I think we absolutely should, is there a way to leverage the rezoning so that the only way that you can develop there is to have some required component of affordability in your development? Or does everything have to be equal across all the different zoned sectors of the city?
We're looking at you, Peter.
Yeah, that's right. That's why we hired RKG to do that analysis partially. One way to do that would be, we can't say you have to provide workforce housing right now with state statute, but we can say, we can look at the development sort of pro forma, the cost for developing a site, and then figure out how many units they could build by right with our current zoning, and then figure out how many units they would need to build to make money, and then put it down to a point where they need to take advantage of an incentive, such as workforce housing, to build enough units to make money. And there's a model that RKG came up with that allows us to sort of play around with those numbers to see if we can do that and lower the allowed density, and then with an incentive, they can go back up to that allowed density. That's the idea.
Does anybody know what the IZ legislation is? Wasn't there legislation in Concord for
yeah, I don't know where it
Omnibus
is.
bill?
Yeah.
The omnibus,
Rebecca's?
Yeah.
Yes, it got voted down, but I talked to Rebecca and she said, I'm down, but I'm not out. It's going to come back before the end of the session. John?
Can I just make one point? I just want to, one of the things that is different about New Hampshire than other states is, and again, this is what I was told, is New Hampshire is a states' right state, which means that you can't do anything unless there's enabling legislation that lets you do it. Other states that are locally driven, if the state doesn't say you can't do it, you can do it. In New Hampshire, you can't do anything unless the state provides enabling legislation. So that's why, some things that we might want to do that would be good for us, if the state enabling legislation isn't there. I mean, it's kind of interesting, I've got some notes here of some of the suggestions that were made at earlier meetings, and when someone said that, I said, I don't know if there's, if you can do that. So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment because when I first got involved in any of this stuff, I wasn't aware of that, and I kept saying, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? So I just to level set everything, so.
Yeah, and I think that's part of our education is learning that legal landscape. There's no home rule in New Hampshire. If there were, we'd have a pillow tax and we'd have all kinds of things. But Jen, that just seems like such a straightforward thing that we ought to maybe do something quickly on.
Great. I also think it's worth talking about the details of what our incentive structure is right now. I had some conversations recently. I think right now, if you put in the 10% affordable units, they have to be equal to the market rate units and scattered in equal distances throughout the building. Mm-hmm. And I had, on the surface, I think that sounds really fair and really important. And then I had this conversation with somebody who was looking at building housing downtown, and they said, well, in order for me to afford to build housing downtown, I have to make like a beautiful gym, and I have to do like all of these extras, right? To afford the rents that will allow me to build this expensive building downtown. Adding the 10% affordable in that scenario allows me to build fewer units overall. If you took that money, say it's $400,000 a unit, if you took that $400,000 a unit and put it somewhere else, maybe you could get two $200,000 units, and maybe we don't need the fancy gym for somebody who just wants an affordable unit.
Bless you.
I don't know if we have space in this or a breakout to have those types of conversations, because I think it's worth looking at all of that type of stuff.
I would argue that everyone should have availability to a nice gym, and it's not so much about segregating affordable housing elsewhere. It's about creating a mixed income unit that helps create a better community for us all. And I completely understand the economics of it aren't great within the city of Portsmouth, but plenty of cities allow for that. I have friends that do live in affordable housing, and their unit is just the same as the person that pays market rate. And then they have access to those amenities.
We just have to decide what our values are, right? Is the value to have one person get the nice unit, or
but they're not all nice units.
People?
I would change the language around nice unit, not nice unit, because it's where somebody lives. And so I think we should be careful with that type of language. But so maybe market rate versus workforce housing, right?
Yeah, and do we want to have 2 workforce housing units for the same amount of money that it would cost to put in 1 workforce housing unit in that same building? I guess I understand where you're coming from, and certainly segregation is not anybody's goal, but it does come down to what are the values and what is the ultimate goal here? Is it to create a lot of units, or is it to create some units that are absolutely equal? I'm just putting it out there.
I'd offer up the idea, Jen, with what you're saying. It's hard to speculate, and you don't want to speculate, but the idea, if there is a development going on right downtown, there's the pro of creating some type of workforce housing, a unit, if you will, for our discussion, that's close to walking distance to where that person may be working. Then there's the trade-off. Do we accept some type of in lieu of payment where we could create 2, but they're outside of town, but they're on a bus line? So there's going to be lots of discussion. I think it's a hard thing to put a bow tie around and say, this is it. And-
Yeah,
and-
but I think it's worth having the conversation about what.
And the conversation, I think, is going to really be perpetual as there's constant evaluation of how we're achieving our goals, how these are being met. But I'll just add into that, there was a lot of people speaking during the outreach effort were saying it's just not about creating a number, it's about creating choices. So, and RKG spoke about it a little bit too. If there's one at 100%, would we be better off if we had two at 80% somewhere else? And so there's going to be this value that's constantly needing to be discussed.
Yep.
Well, we know that from the RKG study, the hardest place to do affordable housing is downtown, when they looked at those 5 zones.
But if the omnibus went through, I think that would change because of the parking requirements, wouldn't it? Because if you looked at the data, it was just under, I think it was the break-even point, 15%. Some of those were just under 15%, and then if you took away any parking minimum, that would probably tip you over the edge to being
Right.
viable. That was my read, and I'm not an engineer, but that was my read of that data.
And parking is within our control as a city, right?
Yep, that's right. The one thing that a parking expert will tell you is that even if we dropped our parking for housing, the finance to build those projects, they're going to require the parking. So you're not necessarily going to get that. It's not going to open it up completely, but it may do it in some cases, depending on the financing.
Tracy, do you have any thoughts, having tried to get some downtown projects for housing done?
Parking would absolutely make a huge difference. That's the number one thing. The number two thing is more flexibility in group housing, I'll call it, or co-housing, or different names for it.
Boarding house.
Boarding house, whatever you want to call it. It's right now not allowed in most downtown zones. It's the best way to make housing affordable is to share space. Make that legal and not require so many cars. Problem solved.
Yep. And it used to be all through Hancock Street and Brewster Street, those kinds of things were common.
When you talk about parking requirements, because this was brought to me as a possible option about parking, would be to pull parking out of zoning altogether and put it as part of site plan.
Absolutely. I was noticing recently, and I lost track of it, but there was a update to the Portsmouth parking
Principles.
manifesto.
Our principles.
Yes, and the number one thing was unchanged from previously, which said all parking burden shall be borne by residences and none by business. I think it needs to flip the other way.
Yeah. No question in my mind that an opportunity for significant numbers of units that are affordable are shared living quarters downtown that are walkable. It's a missing piece that our community should have. And we've tried. And right now, the zoning barriers are just too high.
For example, all the office space downtown, you could never, ever convert that to housing because currently downtown overlay, you don't need parking for offices, but you do for residential. These buildings are built lot line to lot line. They've been there for hundreds of years. They'll never have parking on site. And until the zoning changes or site regs change for parking, you'll never, ever convert those to housing. So there's a lot of empty space that could be perfect for housing above the retail, the upper floors of everything downtown. All those upper floors that are currently offices, they're going to have to stay offices until the zoning changes.
Do we see that as something that might be good to put sooner rather than later?
Yes.
Got that?
You stole my thunder. That was going to be my wrap-up question near the end. So start prioritizing these in terms of term.
I'm always impatient. Jen, you also had parking requirements and develop a rail trail zone.
Yeah, I don't know. I was on the rail trail.
talk to me about
It's so fun. I don't know if you guys have been out there, but it's awesome. And we had a lot of conversation last time around. I think last time or 2 meetings ago about transportation and just more options. And I think now that we have this great amenity, we might as well use it. It's an easy way to get downtown if you
Yeah.
are working there.
It's a transportation corridor.
Yeah, kind of.
Any other questions for Jen on hers? Great. Dagan, you just have the sort of
What a novel idea I
holistic
came up
view.
with, huh? Simple man with a not so simple goal. I think probably my objectives are actually more goals, but as I want to do, I misunderstood the assignment. I'll just kind of try to hit quickly a few of the things that I think are most relevant here in our conversation. Piggybacking off of the conversation we were just having, I think it would be wise for us to review neighborhoods and building types on a rubric of character, feasibility, and density. This is not entirely relevant to housing, but I do think it ties in. It's a term I've heard a lot more recently, which is that we are having a loneliness epidemic, and we are doing our community a disservice by having zoning that has everybody living alone. One of the biggest contributors to depression, anxiety, is not having a sense of community. And so if we're able to look at building types that invigorate that, that also honor the distinct and essential character of Portsmouth, I think that's a win-win. And that goes to my objective of, modernize outdated zoning regulations to align with current and future needs. I think parking is a great example. I think we should go to all the necessary land use boards and committees and just ask them for the low-hanging fruit, the things that we can actually change. To John's point about those particularities of living in New Hampshire that do and do not allow us to do certain things regardless of how good of an idea it is. Let's find out what we actually can do. I also wanted to, this goes back to a conversation we were having earlier about the hometown buyers program. I did a little experiment in going to the city webpage, and I would recommend everyone to do it, and try to find where the resources are for housing. They are not very readily available. And one of the few things that I can bring to this board is some experience with marketing, and I think we have a lot of work to do on simply making the resources that are out there more accessible and raising awareness around them. So things like let's go to the city homepage. See anything on housing up there? Where would you go first? I went to residence. Let's go over to residence.
No, it's not there.
There it is, in planning and sustainability. A lot of,
If you go into the search engine, though, I just put in housing, and it did give you a bunch of search results. Blue Ribbon Committee, related reports,
It doesn't show you more than one page.
endowment fund. Well, when you do a search, so go do it up there. Just put in housing.
I'm not trying to,
That's what it gives you, yeah.
yeah. So
Lots of different things.
I just brought this up more to have you visually explain a little bit the position. It's 3 clicks to get to housing, or you do search or whatever. So you're considering that housing is of such importance that ought to be maybe even up here in the blue line or in a pull-down menu somewhere right on the landing page.
Yes, I think that. I mean, I know it's crazy to say 3 clicks is too many, but In my opinion, it is. And then when you get to those pages, they are not.
I think you're getting to it right now.
Yeah. I also think all of us here are volunteers. I'm certain we could find a volunteer graphic artist. I've been following the city's Instagram page. And, I'm a modern boy. A lot of the people that we're talking about who are in need of housing are, we live in an information age, for better and for worse, and having information that's easy to digest and readily available is essential to getting people to actually use that information. So something simple as like an infographic about how to use the hometown program, or frequently asked questions about affordable housing in New Hampshire, where someone can learn that, yes, as a city, we cannot require any sort of affordability component. And that might alleviate some of the animosity that is being spewed towards the city for what they are not doing. And then another thing that I think we have an opportunity here, and I was thinking about this in thinking about the character that we so often associate with Portsmouth, and it's brick facades and Manfred roofs. We did that because this place kept burning down, and we needed to figure out a way to not put kindling units right next to each other, right? So we decided to make everything built out of brick. We are approaching a climate crisis. Some would argue that we are in it currently, and I wonder if we can couple new development that is prepared for the climate reality of our future, and also fulfilling a public need, and other ways in which we can use that rising tide floats all boats model. So something along the lines of, and I don't even know the feasibility of this, but when we are building properties on city-owned land, solar has been a much debated topic, but if we are installing solar on those properties, we have Portsmouth Community Power. Perhaps any solar project I've ever heard about, and I am by no means an expert, always yields a greater amount of energy than the unit requires. So if we are yielding excess energy on these city-owned units, and that is going into Portsmouth Community Power to bring down the electrical rates of our citizens, that's a win-win.
Yep.
And inevitably, people respond best, myself included, when there's a little something in it for me. So ways in which we can do that, I think, will continue to bring the community will and political capital that we need to see these projects through.
Yeah. The Community Power Coalition is just starting to negotiate their first power purchase agreements, including one with a 20-acre solar farm. So they're just, they're only 2 years old.
Yeah.
But it's exciting to me that they're looking to make a market in renewable energy and pass those savings back to the consumers. So
Great.
yeah.
So I offer a little bit of thought, Dagan, and there's a little bit of a nexus with other comments that people have had about zoning change and things like that. And it was mentioned by Rick when he was here that there's only form-based code in the historic district, and that could be an exploration about maintaining character of the city, but introducing more modern, contemporary needs, demands, and future expectations of what housing's going to need to be through adjusting where that form-based code is, as opposed to more traditional black and white. So, and it could work in the idea of removing parking and things like that. So,
Love it.
Yeah. Well, there's quite a clear consensus to get rid of our outdated zoning barriers in whatever way we can. So I think getting the list and translating that into a set of goals and actions where we need to go.
Thought of one other thing actually that I wanted to mention, and it was brought up in the document that you shared about the Vermont initiatives, where time is money. So if we can figure out a way to have templates of structures, housing that are not pre-approved, but that follow a, a developer can say, if I check all these boxes, I can essentially go through a fast lane in the permitting process and reduce 2 years to 6 months. And that in and of itself would stimulate development.
Yes. Yeah. And I thought those were some good examples of urban infill types in that Vermont study. Has that produced some results, Howard? Is it too new to know, or is it?
It's really too new to know, but I would put out with a little bit of caution of being an equal comparison to Portsmouth. It works well, I think, in Vermont because there is more opportunity in terms of undeveloped land. There's certainly an effort to be done in terms of understanding the character around here and what could be done. But it would move more into, as you said, and is spoken about in the Vermont report, about density being added without really being noticed in some areas as well. So it's for thought. Maybe not a true application, but there's some things that can be definitely borrowed from it.
Yeah, and I was intrigued with their maps that they had gone through cities in the state and targeted zones in those cities where they said this is ripe for infill and density. It would be interesting to look at a map of Portsmouth with an eye to that, see what it looks like, maybe in conjunction with the RKG model. Anything else? Questions for Dagan? Thanks. Mary.
Okay. I think I went a little out of scope at some point, but so I was trying to think about what this committee can do as a non-policy making body of volunteers, and putting that as the perspective for some of our goals and the recommendations that we could make, as well as scrolling through the Portsmouth Listens report, thinking about what priorities my group had, and coming up from there. The first one is just around understanding the impact of a changing private sector and changing business models, and thinking in particular about short-term rentals, and if there's anything for us to be able to consider or look into as part of this body in order to recommend to the city. So I know New York has just changed some of their short-term rental laws, thinking about other cities that have also done that. As more and more short-term rentals come online here, I know there's some regulation around that or provisions around that doesn't mean that they're being followed. And so perhaps doing more of a grassroots perspective on that, because that takes away affordable housing.
Yeah.
Peter, can you just clarify?
Yeah, short-term rentals less than 30 days are not allowed in the city, but it's a real enforcement headache. There's not funds to have, that enforcement happens. So other models that seem to work is either you allow it and regulate it, and that way you can pay for staff to enforce it, and it fits more into, where it is allowed is in an inn or a bed and breakfast or hotel. And there are zones where that's allowed, but people that rent out Airbnb type short-term rentals are using a part of their home that could be rented to someone who works in a restaurant or something like that. So it is an issue. It's something that enforcement could help with.
I was
Enforcement is the challenge.
told by someone that it was allowed downtown. Is that not? That was an incorrect thing that.
It's not allowed in the way you think of like a short-term rental, like a VRBO or Airbnb.
Okay.
Less than 30 days, it's not allowed.
No. Okay.
Unless it's an inn or a bed and breakfast that's registered.
As-
Pays the rooms and meals tax. And
Yes.
that. So then there's that too. They're not paying taxes and they're taking away spaces for people to live. So
Just one counterpoint to that, which is all true, is that it can allow someone to stay in their home longer if they can rent a room to help pay their taxes. So that's a component of affordability. So I don't think a wholesale outlawing them is the answer. I think controlling them is certainly important. You've seen other communities decimated by an overrun of Airbnbs, but I think a balance is important, and regulating them is the way to go.
The program I think New York is adopting has to do with like if you are like if it's the ADU building with on your property or a room, like the traditional, like if it's a room in your house or you're on vacation, there was some sort of provision about like owner occupied. But I thought it was something to consider, at least look into.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some communities do a certain number of weeks or months per year. There's a lot of different ways they go about it.
But I agree with the point of like it's part of the initial goal I think of that business was like helping create an affordable opportunity for homeowners.
Yeah. Other items that you had here?
Yeah, so one of the pieces that I've kind of felt over the last 2 years is around building community trust and partnership, which will help create that political will and buy-in from a community. So I think it would be useful potentially for this group to support perhaps how to evaluate existing visioning and then kind of assess our adherence to that. Also think about conducting dialogues to understand overall planning approaches and best practices and kind of help create a better conversation mechanism with neighborhoods, and then also making sure the overall neighborhood needs and challenges and the overall neighborhood context is perhaps better understood by all departments before initiating a specific plan. And so my context for this is living in Panaway and often feeling a little bit forgotten. And there's many reasons from that. I think it's the physicality of being sandwiched between a highway and an airport. But if there had been, I think a lot of folks in the community, well, even though it's not involved, the feeling of like we don't have the sound barriers, our sidewalks were just redone. So maybe thinking about, what is it, the CIP, is that where people, so kind of reading into where that is and thinking about some of the neighborhood, but anyway, having an opportunity to kind of create that dialogue was one of the other pieces that I thought about. Especially kind of thinking about what Howard had mentioned about having every third meeting an opportunity for public dialogue.
Right. Good.
My final three were just around understanding the impacts of local and regional transportation. And so evaluating that and looking into both formal and informal networks, and then also recommending actions to support that, to support an advancement of more transit-oriented development and provisions for more diversified transportation options. Here is thinking about the bike lanes that went away. And then my other thoughts was just, we had some conversations in my Portsmouth Listens group around the tenant and landlord experience and thinking about some of our mom and pop landlords and how could we kind of just, I guess, have like a listening session with those folks because that is a large population.
And they hold some keys.
They hold some keys, and also from the experience that I know of folks that have rented here, it's very different. I think some of the provisions that I was used to getting as a renter in other cities aren't always happening here. And so making sure that things are clean, things are as safe, and that piece.
Yeah. There is some work on transportation happening through the Economic Development Commission. There's a task force there that's starting to look at microtransit options. I know they've had conversations with C&J based on what C&J has been doing over in Kittery. So, yeah, housing and transportation are joined at the hip. If there's more useful transportation, as as Howard says, if there's, could we stimulate more affordable units on bus lines so that people can get into town? But it's not easy. I mean, pulse transportation, where something's going every 20 minutes, is very expensive. So, but there's also, some ways to do it. So there's work on that happening.
And my final piece was just a climate change consideration and making sure, I think it would be just making sure that is either a top of mind for anything that the city is doing or any sort of housing, any sort of committee. It would feel remiss if that wasn't included.
Yes, and you were not the only person to say that.
Yeah.
Anyone else have some goals that we should be fleshing out?
I just want a couple of quick comments. When Tracy was talking about the housing and the community housing, it's kind of interesting. And the fact is that I didn't think of it till we were talking about it, is that I had a friend years ago that lived on State Street in a beautiful house, and they shared a bathroom, which you can't do, today. But when you think about the character, the building was still the same. It didn't look any different. You had a couple of people who had basically one-room apartments, and they shared a bathroom, and those are the types of things that, we might be able to look at doing under certain circumstances, which would address part of what Tracy was talking about, those types of things. The other thing I just wanted to mention, again, picking up a little bit on what Mary said in the neighborhood thing, one of the things that's kind of overriding in my mind is that we talk about other city properties that may be appropriate for housing. One of the things that I keep in the back of my mind is that, we did run into some issues with Sherburne. And anytime you get involved in a situation, you have some choices to make and some results that come out of it. My thought is, if we do a very good job at Sherburne, some of the pushback that we got there might not take place at the other locations. If we do a lousy job at Sherburne, the chances of us developing any other properties diminishes. So we have an opportunity to prove that the city wants to do a good job. And if we do a good job, then I think the other pieces will have a better opportunity to succeed.
Yep. Eric?
I couldn't agree more with John. I mean, everybody has put Ruth's Place up on the pedestal for, an example. And that took a particular key, a special key on that piece of property to turn that into what it is. Sherburne has a different key that's going to open up opportunities. And I couldn't agree more that if you do a good job there, the rest, other things will fall into place.
Right. And I think there'll be time to do that. Howard, did you want to talk about priorities?
To wrap up the work plan, I would say that those who have not handed in their assignment to please do so.
There's amnesty.
Yeah, amnesty is going to be over soon. But it's a living document, so it can be added, it can be adjusted. What is going to happen next is we're going to start getting more columns out of this. We're going to start getting ideas about if this is something we're going to hit between now and a year, or start it now and it's going to go 3 years out and things like that. And I'm going to start introducing things that came out of the having to do with the master plan, remaining from the land use committee, and so forth. So it's not going to fit on an 8.5 by 11 anymore. And then to roll into the agenda item set aside for me is the RFQ for Sherburne School. The period for comments and questions to come back from interested parties ended day on Friday. So we're going to be assembling and then reissuing out. So that's still going on, even though in the background.
Does the filing period close? I thought it closed on the 7th, or it's already closed.
The period to respond that ends on the 7th.
Okay.
But we noted in the RFQ, Eric, that if you got any questions, you need to let us know by this.
Okay.
So we can answer those questions and get them back out to all the interested people.
Good, thank you.
Any further timeline as of after the 7th, where a review process is of qualified bidders for an RFP?
There hasn't been any established yet. So we're going to get all the responses back, and then the city manager, I believe, is going to be the one that proceeds on deciding what the timeline is and process.
Is there a timeline, and I know we've had some brief discussion, but I mean, is there a timeline for the tax credit program that any developer would have to subscribe to with the federal government? I know there was an August date mentioned, but has there been an extension on that?
There's been no extension. I think it's going to be really tough to meet that for any developer.
But there's different tax credits as well, so there's not just one tax credit program.
I know, there was one kind of focused one at the end of August,
Yep,
or sometime in August.
right.
Before we move off the work plan, could I request that we get the dates that this committee is going to meet for the next couple months emailed to us?
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Okay,
Good point.
Thank you.
right.
It's hard to set your calendar when you don't know.
But I'll echo what the assistant mayor said. You know, I think as we get into the summer, we
We are
probably,
into summer.
But 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks.
school's not out. We'll not have the twice a month pace. Hopefully, we can get some working groups set up so that we can have free-range working groups that aren't as tied to a meeting calendar. Did you have any more on yours?
No, public comment.
Okay. Just to wrap up on this discussion, there were a couple of things that came out of it. I sense a lot, we're all aligned on city property conversions, and that is something to do sooner rather than later. I think John and Eric are right. What can we learn from the last process? How do we do it better? It would seem to me that our committee should go visit these sites and engage with the neighbors, make that a site visit that's open to the public, and begin a process where we're saying what we're doing, and then we're doing it. We're saying what we're doing, involving people as we do it. In terms of the zoning, I'm hearing that we could move right ahead on commercial conversion to residential.
Office.
An office. And I'm hearing that we have some eagerness to create shared living situations downtown, remove the barriers for that. And John, in addition,
Parking too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Parking was the last one there. Yeah.
yeah, parking is blinking red,
Yeah.
isn't it? So, Beth, did I miss anything?
Nope.
Yeah.
Also to try to move up, talk to the communications person for the city to try to move housing to be a more focus off the website, or at least more visible focus
Yeah.
information.
One click instead of 3.
Yes.
Don't want to tire that finger out, Howard.
I was going to say, I know how to find it, but I go to the website like 10 times a day.
Right. Those of us from a slower generation are okay with 2 clicks. But
At least Dagan didn't suggest that Howard start a TikTok.
That was one of the goals that I scrapped.
Thank you for scratching that.
Right, we all have to dance, the housing dance.
Housing dance.
Okay, public comment. Come on up. We've got time for 3 minutes each.
Oh, I hope to use not all of that.
Okay.
Hi.
Name and address?
Andrew Simonis, 460 Richards Ave.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. I'll go through. I took notes kind of in the sequence of the meeting, how it unfolded. The Portsmouth Hometown Buyer Program is facilitated through Citizens Bank. I think someone commented about that. Right now, the two-person household income for that at 120% area median income is only $87,000, and that was set in 2017. So if a two-person household is making $87,000, they're not buying a home in Portsmouth. I'm just going to be very frank with you, and that's what I do day to day. I sell between $40 and $50 million worth of real estate in this area on an annual basis. These are conversations I have a lot. In my 7 years of doing this, I've used that program twice, or buyers of mine have used that program twice. It's a phenomenal program. It is hamstrung because of the fact that it is only through Citizens Bank and the fact that it can only be used for a two-bedroom or two-person household up to $87,000. For a three-person household income, for reference, it's $97,000. So at that point, you're now living below, let's call it a comfortable wage in Portsmouth and in a lot of places, not just Portsmouth. Someone talked about the renter assistance, so down or first month rent, last month rent. What I think is more critical, right now I'm handling a building in Portsmouth. I'll be as vague as possible while still trying to give you real context. It is specifically kind of geared towards a younger population. There are applicants anywhere from 24 to 32 who may be kind of getting out of the city or getting out of school, getting out of grad school, medical school, whatever it may be. And they may have the means. They have a really decent $80,000, $90,000 a year job. What happens is their credit score is generally not as sufficient because they have not had any borrowing power or need to have any borrowing power up until this point. So if there is a facilitation of companies or the city that can look at how to help and substantiate some of these renters who, sure, it may be more than the 30% that is recommended throughout America of their living costs, but I think this credit score and the down payment of renting is important. On top of the down payment assistance, the Hometown Buyer Fund, beyond the supply and demand issue that we cannot control as this room exists, there are also opportunities that I know Dover is doing, Keene is doing it, Nashua I think just started a portion of it, whether it's move-in costs, so down payment and like closing credits, or renovation costs as well. So I sold a home in Ellen Park, it was $590. This young couple about to get married, kind of like shelling out everything they have to buy the home, and now it needs to be renovated. So if they could also take advantage or capitalize on some renovation costs or assistance, that would be really helpful, because it's great to have them in Portsmouth, but we don't need their house dilapidated because they literally are house poor. And that was conservative at $590. Like, that was below what they wanted to spend, so it's all well and good. A real example that came up from these rentals that I've been doing lately was a chef downtown Portsmouth at 2 separate restaurants. He just got a raise, which was excellent. However, he just got priced out of Ruth Griffin Place because of that raise. So now he went from $1,300 he was paying there to a $2,000 studio, which he could not qualify for even with the raise included. So you have this converging issue that hopefully we can solve through some mechanism of affordability or workforce housing. And he works downtown, does not want a car, does not need a car. Therefore, he's like, yeah, this is perfect. I just can't stay at Ruth Griffin Place. Right. Mr. O'Leary talked about the shipyard housing. That's certainly an accurate point, and obviously was a critical thing in the early 40s and 50s. I think one of the stipulations to corporations or larger companies doing that is that the residents and or employees of those corporations, they want to have to live there, right? And I think when you look at a place like the shipyard, they are stipulated that they have to be within 20 miles of that place, that destination. Same with doctors, on call, things like that. But outside of that, if you work at Lonza, you want to have to live somewhere as well. If there are a certain amount of inventory options for you, then so be it. But at least give them options to start with. And so maybe, yes, a corporate type of partnership with places like Lonza or Liberty Mutual or Service Credit Union would be advantageous for everyone, but it has to be desirable for a variety of residents. It happens a lot with corporate relocation, whether it's CSX does this a lot. So CSX will relocate their employees from Georgia, send them to Portsmouth, and now they have some means to buy a home or move. But again, they have to want to live in these places. Somebody was talking about a scorecard. I think you were talking about it, Mr. Anderson, about a scorecard of lots that could be looked at. We did that on the former iteration of this committee. We did a PULA study where we ranked the open land in the city of Portsmouth based on what was most desirable for development, whether that was public or private development. And I think that would be a good iteration or concept to use here. The planned use development, Atlantic Heights is non-conforming at this point by all standards. It doesn't offend me. It doesn't seem to offend anybody that lives there currently. So yes, a planned use development is a great idea. What is that going to look like within our current zoning? It's probably not going to work. So as Councilor Merlot alluded to, John and Maggie Randolph did something in Dover where that was a very micro-housing concept. And I think that obviously being non-conforming is something that we could welcome in with the knowledge base that, yeah, we're going to have to make some tolerances or be more accommodating to someone that wants to do this. Even though they're a private developer, and that's a scary word, we have to be accommodating of those things because that's the only way you take action, the only way that something gets done. Ms. Sloan referenced something about Airbnb. It's the Augusta rule that you're talking about that people were probably referencing. The Augusta rule means that you can rent your house for 14 days in the calendar year, and the IRS does not collect tax on that. That's allowed throughout the entire city. The last example, and I'm sorry if this is over 3 minutes, the Wentworth Senior Living. So we were talking about these young people that are housing burdened. Look at Wentworth Senior Living and loneliness particularly. Wentworth Senior Living is downtown Portsmouth, been there forever, has 66 units ranging from 325 square feet to 600 square feet. And even though that's for an older generation, that concept still works downtown Portsmouth. They have, I think, 13 parking spaces for 66 residents. And that to me is like, okay, this can exist. And these people can work and operate within this small realm. So it's not just the younger generation. It could be the older generation that we have to appeal to by creating more of that Wentworth Senior Living component. And then by doing that, taking the elderly generation or folks who do not need or want a large house anymore and relocating them while still keeping them in the Portsmouth community. Because that is the age-old question is, I would love to sell my house. It's 3 bedrooms. I don't need it because I'm a single individual. But where do I go within Portsmouth and not have to uproot my lifestyle? So if you can solve that equation, you then unlock all this pent-up inventory that people are sitting on and they have nearly 100% equity in, that they can then go into one of these facilities. And it's not to push them there, it's to kind of enable them to go there. And I think those are all questions. Although young people, yes, are really stressed, it is also something about this older generation that has something to be answered. So apologize if that was over 3 minutes. But
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
I want to live
Jim?
for senior living. I'm going to put in my name now.
Thank you. Jim Smalley. These are just thoughts. They're not as perhaps as coherent or as fluid as I'd like, but just principles. The more constraints, requirements you place on housing, the supply of housing, the less housing you're going to have. It's that simple. The more constraints, the less housing. The more requirements, the less housing. Right? That's like gravity, right? It's the law of supply and demand. Private developers, private sector will provide housing to virtually all income levels. Virtually all income levels when allowed to do so. Right? But look at the conditions required by the city and constraints placed upon developers by the city. Right? Remove the shackles. Peter, you mentioned, you had the comment, one of the ways we incentivize is by we lower density, that's artificial, we're artificially lowering density. Then we're going to allow greater density. So let that sink in for a minute. We're going to artificially reduce the supply of housing in the hopes that we get more housing. Right? You're going to end up with less housing and less affordability if you just allow the housing to be built. It's only going to be built if it's profitable and market economically feasible. Dropping parking isn't the same as zero parking. I believe it's the developer McNabb, who was the Soul Restaurant. Was on, yeah, correct. Okay. That required 46 parking spaces, but they were granted a zoning waiver for 0. If there's an underscore of why parking isn't actually related to demand, that's one of them. Right? The parking requirements bear no relationship to demand. They're artificial. Even the original, I forget the name of the association that promoted them, their president has come out and said, do not follow them. They're not related. The recommendation now is to have, instead of parking minimums, have parking maximums, yes. Where if you want to build more than, say, have more than 5 parking spaces, you need a variance then. Not saying you have to have 5 parking spaces. Developers are going to supply the parking that's going to sell the property. They're going to calibrate better than the city government will because they have an incentive to do so. The city government is as well-intentioned as it is, doesn't carry that, doesn't have to pay the pocket, doesn't have to pull it out of their pocket, out of their wallet or their pocketbook, that cash. Evolution of zoning. This, the shift from the private sector to active government, right? Pre-1961, the focus was on externalities. New York City in 1957 had the first inclusionary zoning with, I forget the name of the building, but that, and then in 1961 they passed rules that focused beyond externalities. Now, when we talked about externalities, it was you didn't want the tanning factory next to the house, right? That was the example that Rick had given. Now, what do we consider an externality? Other people building another house. Like how offensive that is, right? So it's gone from externalities, and this, by the way, evolved primarily, it really took foot in the 1970s where it accelerated, and it's now a global effect. All over Dubai, it doesn't matter. There's some exceptions to that, like Tokyo, which don't do this type of zoning. But externalities. Then we have aesthetics. That's your HTC. That's your character zoning. Right? You then have efforts to contain urban expansion. You'll have buffer zones, things like that. Then you have the aspirational, sustainability, livability, things like that. We want pretty things. Right? But if you look at the past, such as Atlantic Heights, we need more housing that none of us would want to live in. We need housing that offends our sensibilities. Right? Jen, create units. Absolutely. That's the goal. The greater the supply, the lower the cost, or the more affordable things become. Get back to principles. Get back to root cause. The more active our city government is in trying to design and paint a picture, the higher the cost is, and the less housing supply we have. And create as many units possible that are private sector units. The conversation tonight was great. We absolutely need to have the public affordable units too. We need subsidies for folks who need them, right? Tracy had been talking about that. Half the citizenry here are renters. But I want to put that renter focus is critical here. I talked about there's an international organization and that measures, takes its price to income ratio, and it's the median home price divided by the median income. And they've been doing this for roughly 20 years, 2 decades. And it's done on a global basis. So if the metric is 3, the median home price divided by the median income is 3 or above, it's seen as unaffordable. Below 3 is affordable. 4, you're getting into less affordability. Above 5, and it's considered extremely unaffordable. So, and I mentioned San Francisco was like 9 or something like that, which is close. Portsmouth median home price, median household income. That ratio, median home price is $480K. This is according to the city manager in the budget release that came out a couple weeks ago. $480K, $92K is the median income. That might be a little bit out of date. It might be 95, but close enough. All right. That gives a PIR of 5.21 for Portsmouth. Right? Extremely unaffordable. To be considered affordable, the median income would have to be $162,000 to be comfortable here. $162,000. 75% higher than it currently is. Right? Alternatively, the median home price would have to be $276,000, 40% lower. Right? Put that in perspective. The PIR for someone earning $75,000 is 6.4. For someone earning $50,000, it's 9.6. Right? What do we pay our good firefighters or public employees here? What do we pay the school teachers? And not just the public sector, but folks who want to live here, the restaurateurs, the employees there. You know, city governments across this country have decided to drive up the cost because they want these pretty pictures. And there's greater activism, there's more control. So this city of the open door, which we all love that phrase, right? The cover charge for getting in is $160,000. That's the cost. $160,000 is the minimum income needed to be live affordably here, comfortably here. Right? Now that metric is, there's some complaints about it. It's not a perfect metric, but it's a simple one. And I believe it tends to capture what really is the crisis here. Right? When you do your zoning analysis, do an audit. Is it for safety? If not, why do we need it? For health or safety, if not, why do we need it? And does it drive up the cost? Now, I'm going to be done in one moment here. The Historic District Commission, if you eliminated, we talk about running out of land in Vermont or whatever, again, you're not running out of sky. If you eliminated the height restriction, the two primary drivers are height restrictions and the FAR ratio. If you eliminate the height restrictions, it's not like there's going to be 20-story buildings in the historic district. They can't be built here. It's a government, recognized zone. So that's already off the table. And in putting in the very center of the city, you've now pushed out cost elsewhere. So the rest of the city is actually subsidizing the center of the town in terms of housing costs. But eliminating those two, not eliminating them, eliminating the height restriction, you're only going to have height that's built, and it's going to gently increase. It's not, you're going to end up with these towers, but places where I forget what the zoning was changed for the different commercial districts.
Gateway 1.
The gateways, right. Places like that would be a place where you already have some development where the prices of land are higher as a result, and the higher the price of land is typically the higher the height of a building. Right? So, and that's where you end up with more units. So, I want to stress just against the micromanagement of things and trying to step back and again, just look at root cause. If you were starting again, what would you do? You know, the good folks at the planning committee in the planning department, I can't predict the future. I don't know how, I can't predict if the Celtics are going to win the championship this week. We're talking about things that have extensive decades, long processes, long impacts. Be careful when you make irreversible decisions. Right? You can, once you put a zoning in place, it's hard. Once you repeal it, you're going to free up a lot of what's tied up because there's that incentive is put back. The natural capital incentive is put back. And that's why Atlantic Heights was built. You can't name a single property in the city, one of the gems that was built from a public plan. Not one. You can't name one in Paris that was built from a public plan. Not one. Nor New York City, the gems in New York City, not one. We've gone a long way from the externalities. So, anyway, that's probably more than 4 minutes or 3 minutes, but thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Anybody else for public comment? Manny? None? Okay. If not, welcome a motion to adjourn.
You got it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.